We have today Shane Fenton. Next one is on the 23rd of November, which will be Anne-Marie Fallon, who's talking about achieving net zero estates. Anne-Marie cut her teeth in Ireland with Joseph Little's practice, and is very involved in EnerPHit, and has since joined Archetype, and will be giving us very good insight into what's happening in the UK in relation to net zero estates. We will then have on the 30th of November Suzanne Winkle from the Passive House Institute, who's giving everybody an update in relation to becoming certified Passive House designers and tradespersons, and also in how you can renew your existing status. A lot of people are finding that after 5 years that they actually lapse if they haven't produced a certified Passive House or maintained their CPD points. So that'll be covered. We also have Bob Ryan, who will be launching some very pertinent Irish thermal bridge details typical for passive houses. On the 7th of December, then we'll be wrapping up with Passive House and the RAI Climate Challenge. Helena McNeil will be basically telling us all about how the RIAI Climate Challenge works and how we can use PHPP ribbon or the Passive House ribbon with Tim Martell of AACB to achieve that standard. So Shane is going to start off today with PHPP 10 tips and tricks. Shane holds a degree in architecture from University of Limerick. He completed his Passive House designer course way back in 2016 and has since become an NSAI Approved Thermal Modeller. He's working on a number of retrofit and Passive House projects with Wain Morehead Architects, whom he joined in 2013. He loves any tech challenge and is at home driving Revit and Dynamo to the limit. He's lecturing at the moment on PHPP in TU Dublin Master's course in Building Performance, which is the Energy Efficiency and Design course. Shane, if you'd like to share your screen there, I think you could launch into your PHPP 10 tips and tricks, please.
Thanks, John, and welcome everyone.
It's all good.
No, very good. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of PHPP for those who are unfamiliar with PHPP. PHPP at its core is a series of Excel spreadsheets and tabs, and it's fairly extensive, and it's been developed by the Passive House Institute in Germany, and it's a design tool, and it is used for demonstrating, well, it's not used as not only as a design tool, but it's used for demonstrating compliance with the Passive House standard, and whether it be Passive House for new buildings or to EnerPHit, which is a retrofit for existing buildings. There's approximately 47 tabs in PHPP, and some depending I suppose on the complexity of your building and the type of building you're using, and they're related to the building fabric, climate, ventilation, summer heat and cooling, services, and there's a number of tools for analyzing results and for giving instructions, and now there's a number of supplementary external tools as well that the Passive House Institute have provided, where you can, for use with complex buildings or for very simple buildings where you might only have 1 or 2 rooms as well. You need very detailed input rather of your building fabric including your walls, roof, floors, and in particular your windows and the shading characteristics associated with all those elements as well. There's a number of, or rather, the PHPP and Passive House is very much focused on a fabric first approach, and that is I suppose the most significant difference to Deep, in that it's very much a fabric first approach, where you deal with your energy losses and comfort in particular, before you supplement with any renewables or make decisions on your heating systems, whether it be a heat pump or whether it be electric heating or compact community, etc. It's a site-specific tool, where you can use site-specific climate files that are generated very specifically for the exact location, or you can use climate data sets that are included with the file or with the software. We now have we used to have 4 climate data sets, which have been, and it's now been expanded to 7. In PHPP 9, we had Cork, Dublin, Burr, and Belmullet, and we now have Finner, Enniscorthy, and Kilkenny. Something to be wary of when you're working with the climate data sets is that the climate data sets vary across Ireland in whether they are part of are considered warm temperate or cool temperate. This can have a significant impact when you're dealing with existing buildings and you're trying to achieve the EnerPHit standard. So the EnerPHit standard, if you were trying to achieve the EnerPHit standard for a building in Cork, your limiting demand, your heating demand rather, would have to be below 20. Whereas if you are trying to achieve EnerPHit in Dublin, you have up to 25 kilowatt hours per meter square per annum. So there's a difference there of 5 kilowatt hours per meter square per annum. Today we're going to look at some new areas of PHPP, including the overview page, the variance tab in particular, which has been upgraded from version 9. And there's a PHPP Eco tab, which has been updated from version 9, which we won't cover today, but it's an economic evaluation for refurbishment works. And it's particularly useful if you use it with the variance tab and the comparison tab, where you can put you can work out payback periods for various upgrades, and it's particularly useful for a phased development. The overview tab is a new tab, which can give us some useful insights to our building in graphical format for demonstration to client. And I suppose it brings together some of the complex calculations in PHPP in one space for us. The monitoring tab is a new tab that came in version 10 and very useful for post-occupancy monitoring and I suppose fine-tuning buildings and testing buildings to see, I suppose, and inform ourselves going forward on the predicted data, predicted PHPP performance versus the actual real-world performance of our buildings. There's a new stress test for summer comfort included on the summer tab, which is very useful and which we'll cover as well. The inclusion of heat pumps on the components tab has been a welcome addition, and it makes it very easier for, I suppose, bringing heat pump units that we're familiar with from project to project and across PHPP files. And there's also a number of certified units included in the file, and which will be expanded on in the future. There's an ERP file which has been shipped with PHPP 10 as version 10 as well, and it's the EnerPHit retrofit plan, and it's very useful tool particularly for phase developments where you're looking to achieve EnerPHit, and the EnerPHit retrofit plan sheet can be used as pre-certification for your EnerPHit building if you are going that route. And the version 10 also has a number of additional tools and secondary calculations. We won't be able to cover all of these today, but we'll cover a few of them. Version 10 was released to the English-speaking sector in the last couple of months, and is even up to last week, version 10.4 was released with a number of updates. And some of the calculations on some of the tabs we're going to be looking at today are still a work in progress, but I think when they're finished, they're going to be very useful. So this is just a quick snapshot of the variance tab and what we're going to be looking at. The variance tab is covers a bit more detail, but this is just a snapshot of what the variance tab can do. And I suppose at its core, it will return results of a number of different variants to you in one place. So you don't have to manually record lots of different sets of results while you're comparing different comparisons. It's very complex on first use. It's very useful for testing options and design considerations, and particularly useful in retrofit projects. For example, we could quickly assess the implication of different types of insulation in cavity wall or timber frame construction without having to manually record the results. You also have the ability to assess different types of windows, ventilation systems, some ventilation options, to name but a few, without having to manually record your results. There's been a number of key updates on the variance tab, for anyone who is familiar with it. It's the inclusion of the error messages row. I suppose you can see my mouse here. where it shows you if you have an error or not on your various tabs without having to flick through each one of your, or activate each one of your variants manually. You have more control over the inputs on your primary energy renewable tab, and more control over the inputs relating to your heating and domestic hot water systems. And PV installations have now been added as a variant. So you can, I suppose you can start really testing different types of renewable systems, whether it be solar thermal, whether it be PV, whether it be a combination of a heat pump and electric heating, or electric hot water heating, things like that. It's very useful. This is a we're going to demonstrate the variance tab by using, and this is a project we worked on, which was completed last year. It was a retrofit of a typical 1980s dwelling in Cork. And during the design stage, we tested a number of options, which varied from a light touch, I suppose, and doing what was allowed by the budget at the time, versus bringing it all the way to EnerPHit, and whether we could use a phased approach or whether it was better to do everything in one go, and in what order we would have done our upgrade measures in as well. We were able to assess the implication of each upgrade on its own, or what combination of upgrades would be best suited to the project, and arrive at the optimum proposal for the project. This building was also included in the IGBC's iBroad pilot test program, which is a European database of upgrade projects, or retrofit projects rather. So I'll do now is I'll switch to the actual PHP file for the project. When you get your PHP file, you have two PHP files you can use. You can use your standard one, or you can use the one for which your variance tab enabled. The variance tab relies on macros, so it's actually a macro enabled worksheet, and it's constantly running the calculations in the background as you change your variance. So this is the tab. As you can see, it's quite a large tab. It's going to with lots of rows and lots of variables that you can use. But as I said, at its core, what it's doing is it's comparing these different variants and their results, and you have the ability to graph them afterwards as well, which we'll also go through. In this particular project, we have our existing condition, and we would have had quite a number of these variants during the job, but these measures that are shown on the screen at the minute are the ones we actually implemented at the end of the job. So what you have is your existing building. Is variant number one. Number one is up here. We upgraded from natural ventilation to a mechanical extract ventilation system. We installed cavity wall insulation. We replaced the attic insulation and added an airtight vapor control layer. We replaced the windows in the project. Variant number 6 is essentially a combination of all of the upgrades to the thermal envelope plus the ventilation. And variant number 7 is where we upgraded the services, and we upgraded the service with a heat pump and installed the 4 kilowatt photovoltaic system. And later on we will do a live demonstration where we can see what is required to actually bring this to EnerPHit levels of performance. So how do we use the variance? What the variance does is it automatically overrides inputs elsewhere in the PHP file, whether they be on your uValues tab, areas, ground, components. There's a number of default variables that you can select, where you can add building assembly layers. You can we've got our windows, ventilation as a default variant, summer ventilation, cooling units, photovoltaic, and heat generation as well, which is your PER effectively, and all the inputs associated with your PER tab. A useful new feature that was introduced with version 10, as I said, was this X, which is this check mark, which actually indicates which sheets, or which tabs rather, have the variant active. So how you use this is that you would open up, for example, your ventilation tab, which is quite a common one that you'll be using, and you activate your variant calculation up here in this yellow sector here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it off for a second, and it might take a couple of seconds just because the PHP is catching up. So you'll see here all our cells are what we would normally see. They're yellow, which indicates that they're an input cell, or where data is required. So what we do is if we activate the variant, using cell D9 here. When we select the X, these will get some of the inputs will get overridden with a gray hatch. Gray hatch means that the data has been pulled from the variance tab. So you know then that if it's in gray, you don't overwrite, you don't input it, you don't input any data. You input that data on the variance tab, and that's true throughout the file. It's the same on if I go to summer event, all of the cells in the summer event tab are in gray, which means that all the data is being pulled from the variance tab. So when you do that, and just in case for ventilation, use ventilation example, the data is being pulled from the variance tab, and what we do is we just fill out the yellow cells here, and then that data is pushed through to the ventilation tab, and the results then are recorded up here in our variance section. So for example, variant number 1 here was our existing condition. It was window only ventilation. We carried out an air test on the project, which came back at 7.67, and the MEV ventilation then went in variant number 2, and it's an extract air unit. And in this case, we were not considering, we were just doing the ventilation on its own and what that would do. And as you can see, it made, I suppose it made very little difference to the final numbers, made a little difference to the final numbers in their heating demand and heating load, but there was no upgrades considered at that time when we were looking at just this variant on its own to the thermodynamic. So they came later on. Just to note that if there are any questions as I go through the presentation, if they go up in the chat, or we'll try and answer them from about 1:45. Beg pardon. Oh yeah. So a common one, I suppose, when we're retrofitting would be to change the windows in the project. There's a number in the variance tab. There's a number of ways you can deal with your project, and I suppose it depends on the complexity, one, of the project, and two, how you're going to address it. So windows would be a good one. So there are windows here. There's where you can use the default area of the variance tab to change your window parameters. It's quite complex, truth be told, and you have to change the shading parameters and all that as well. Where often we just replace windows, we find, or in our practice, the best thing to do is to just duplicate the basically omit the existing windows and put in the new windows into the model. And how we do that is we use the user input, the user defined input variables that you'll see here. And what these are, the variance tab can't, I suppose, account for every variable that you might have when you're proposing upgrade works to your project. And so what the user defined variables give us the opportunity to do is to customize how we want to address the variables in the project. So the way we do this, as I said, is we turn off the existing windows and turn on the proposed windows. So you'll see here in variant number 5, and I'm just going to highlight these cells here. On variant number 5, what we did was, sorry, wrong ones, these ones. Variant number 5, what we did was we turned off the existing windows and we turned on the proposed windows. And if I go to the Windows tab, I'll just show you how we did that. What we would have done is we would have input our existing windows the same way we normally would, and we input them into the walls, into your walls the same way we normally would as well. And what we did then was afterwards, we would have put in our proposed windows below them. So our proposed windows are going in here. And the reason we find this is the easiest way to do it. If you're going to completely change your window installation, it's the easiest way to do it, because otherwise you have to treat each window individually and back in your variance tab, and it can become quite cumbersome. As I say, yeah, it can become quite cumbersome. So how we do that is we link the cells here back to our variance tab. So you'll see here that this window is linked to this cell on the variance tab, which is telling it that in this particular variant, the existing windows don't exist, but the proposed windows do exist. So I've done 0 and 1 for the quantity, so that would depend on your own project, but that's probably the simplest way to do it. So you see here again on Windows, for all of these variants, the existing windows are turned on, and the proposed windows are turned off. Whereas in variants 5, 6, and 7, these windows are turned. The existing windows are turned off, and the proposed windows are turned on. So it's a very easy way to turn on and off your proposed and your existing windows in this particular case. We use the same method if we're doing substantial changes to the external envelope. As passive out is different to deep again, in that the thermal envelope is measured to the outside. If you have a building and you're going externally insulating the building envelope by, say, for example, 200 mil of insulation, your external area will change quite a bit. So again, instead of having to do all that manually, what we do is we would do 2 sets of drawings. We would do a set of drawings for your existing proposal, and we would do a set of drawings for your proposed proposal. And we would be able to input those areas onto the areas tab. So again, what we would do is we would have our existing envelope be modeled, and then our proposed envelope will be modeled, and we could turn them on and off depending on whether the variant is whether it is applicable or not. Another useful one is particularly now going forward, I suppose, and in the situation we find ourselves in, the services are getting upgraded quite a bit. Variance tab gives you quite a bit of control over what the inputs on the PER tab, which I'm just going to expand on here. This particular project had a heating boiler, and then we added a heat pump to the project at the end as well. So, for instance, when you're inputting your data, and it's supposed to get accurate results, you have to fill out what's on your domestic hot water and distribution tab. And unfortunately, on your domestic hot water and distribution tab, there's no out-of-the-box variance. So what we do is we can use custom variants then for that. So I'm just going to zoom in on this section here, which is your storage heat losses. So storage heat losses of the existing building will be from your hot water cylinder. A hot water cylinder in your existing building is a standard hot water cylinder that would have been fitted back in the 1980s or 1990s. And our new hot water cylinder is a unit suitable for use with a heat pump. So obviously those values differ quite a bit, and there's far less losses from the new unit. So what we did was we would have input this data again on the variance tab down here. And what we simply do is where we have, say, our heat loss rate for our existing cylinder is 3, and our volume is 90, and our heat loss rate for our new cylinder is 1.2, and our volume is 180. So how we do that is we go to our domestic hot water distribution tab, and again we simply say equals to the cell on the variance tab, which is this one. And now anytime you change, no matter how many variants you add, you don't have to come back to this page to manually input the data, and it's always getting reported back to. Excuse me. It's always getting reported back to. Find it very useful as well to highlight the cells that you manually put to the variance tab in grey as well, or maybe a different shade of grey, so that if someone in your office or another consultant picks up the file, they're aware that the data is being brought away from being brought from the variance tab. So what I'm going to do is now is I'm just going to flick back to the variance tab, and I'm going to add a new variant. And I should say as well that this is where you select what variant is active, and if you select an active variant, the verification page is reporting the current performance of the active variant, the same as your overview tab and so on. What we'll do is we'll just we'll make a new variant. Just going to scroll to the top, and this variant is going to be what do we need to do to achieve EnerPHit level. So I'm just going to call it EnerPHit level performance. what we'll do is we'll just scroll up the top. And I know there's 3 measures in this particular project that are required to bring it to EnerPHit level of performance, and they are a mechanically ventilated heat recovery system, and rather than a MEV system, we need to insulate the internally insulate all the external walls, and we need to improve the air tightness. So there's 2. So we'll tackle the air tightness in the HR first. So what I would do is I would scroll down to I'm just going to scroll down to the ventilation section, which is here. So rather than having to again manually do it on the ventilation tab, I can do it all here on the variance tab. What we do is we simply use our drop downs, balanced passive system with heat recovery. We said we wanted to improve our air tightness to 1 to achieve EnerPHit. I'm just going to say 1. Design airflow rate will be 160. To ventilate up, ideally we'll locate the unit inside our thermal envelope, and we can select. If you'll have access to anything on the components page, as you normally do if you're on the ventilation tab, but we're going to select one up here, which is the Wolf system. So now this variant is taking account of a heat recovery system rather than an extract system, or rather than a natural ventilation system. So the other thing we need to change is we need to internally insulate the walls. Again, there's a number of ways you can do this, but in this particular instance, the easiest way to do it is to say that if we're adding internal insulation, we say internal wood fiber insulation. So say a Gutex type product, which is going to have a thermal conductivity of 0.04, and it's going to need to be 60 mil. Or 80 mil rather. Okay, so now we need to apply that to our external walls. What we do is we'll go to our U-values tab. I'll find our walls that are our external walls, this particular U-value, and I know that from my areas tab. And what I can do is I can just go here to the left-hand side, and you can expand it, but if this is not expanded, you'll see a plus sign up here in the top left. And we'll just select internal wood fiber insulation, and that will overwrite any layers that you have in this line already. Now, just bear with me, it's catching up. And you can do the same if you're pumping cavity walls, for example. You can replace the air layer with insulation, or if you have a service cavity, say that you're insulating internally, you can do it in the same way. Now, the reason this is returning 0 is because our active variant isn't the variant that we're looking at. It's actually number 7, which doesn't have any dry line. So if I just change this quickly to number 8, I will flick to the values tab. You'll see how it has now changed to 80. So again, it's pulling the data from the variance tab. So now if we just go check our, so now we can see that all this data has updated. It's showing us that our demand is below 20, which is what we require down here in Cork to achieve EnerPHit, and it's telling us as well that we have met EnerPHit. So again, we've gone from an existing condition, and that we brought that all the way through with various upgrades to the ventilation system, to the fabric, to EnerPHit level of performance. You know, whether that's practical or not, but that shows you what is required, I suppose, to get to that level of performance. A useful, and I suppose this is all numbers based and whatnot, but one of the most useful features, I think, is that all this data that's up here can be graphed. Can be graphed over here to the right hand side. So we can see here, we can see our if this is currently going from 1 to 8, and it's measuring your heating demand. So obviously you can extract that out and you can include in a report for a client or whatever the case may be. That's our heating demand. We can do the same for our heating load. And we can do the same for our PR demand, for example. You can see here, and this is useful in that it shows you that we halved our PR demand by tackling the building fabric. So even if you can't, say, replace the boiler and the solid heat pump, you can have your PER requirement by upgrading the fabric, and while also improving comfort levels in the house, and same with and same for your ventilation system. So we reduced the existing PR demand by half by going at the external fabric, and then we reduced it by a further 60% when we installed the heat pump. We effectively reduced the PR demand for this house from 350 down to 50 kilowatt hours per meter square per annum. Just I suppose to finish off on the variance tab, one other useful one is that you can graph you can graph effectively any other results in PHPP. So I'm just going to show you over here. You've got user defined results, and I've just taken this as an example, the annual heating ventilation heat losses as an example. So what that is doing is that it's pulling the data from the annual heating tab, and it is giving you the data for each of your variants across it. So you can see that we start at 41.7 and we got all the way down to 6.48. So, and you can see that it's referencing cell Q40 on the annual heating tab. But the benefit of doing that, not just getting the numbers here, is that can be graphed. So I'm just going to click up here. And again, you'll go down and you'll see that all of your user-defined results will show up in the section here. Let's click annual heating. And now I can graph and catch it up. It'll graph the annual heating. There we go. So now that's graphing the particular results that might be critical to a particular project that you're working on, whether they be ventilation losses, whether they be window losses, or whether they be frame factors or anything like that. They can all be graphed here across your variants. This is always very useful tool for working with, particularly for working with existing buildings, but also working with new buildings where you're trying to sort of optimize the design and figure out what is the best form, or what's the best combination, I suppose, of methods for your building. Just going to look at the overview tab quickly, which is a new feature that was brought into PHPP, just in version 10. Again, it gives you a summary of what's on of your PHPP. So I'll just go on down to the left-hand side first, just give you your project details, and this is easily printable as well, which is useful. Gives you your results. It gives you your results for the particular variant that's active at the time. So in this instance, we have activated the variant that we brought to EnerPHit levels, so which is highlighted here. And it's giving you the mean value of your of various opaque components, and it's going to give you a summary of your building elements and so on and so on. What's useful though in particular is the graphs on the right hand side, where you are getting the current the performance is being graphed of the active variant. So in this case, it's giving you a breakdown of the PER demand, which will vary again depending across your variants, depending whether it's an existing building or a retrofit. And if I just keep scrolling, it's going to give me my non-renewable primary energy demand, your CO2 associated with that the variant as well, and your final energy demand, your electricity demand. Which again, if this is a non-domestic project, again, this would be quite different again, where you get your plug loads for your equipment, or whether it be a school or healthcare building and so on. And this graph on the face of it can be a bit confusing, but what it's actually doing is it's giving you your percentage of glazing and the amount of net gains or losses that are coming in on each facade. So if you take the east, for example, what this is telling us is that 7% of our eastern facade is frame area, 17% of it is glazing area. So your windows in total are making up 24% of the east facade, and 76% then is external wall. And then the green bar, or the green column in the middle, then is giving you your energy gains. So your energy gains are coming at approximately, what are they, 290 odd kilowatt hours per annum. So it can be useful again to give you just a quick overview of where the building is at. So I'm just now then behind time, so I'm just going to move on to the next project. So this is our West Cork Passive House that was completed in 2016. It's Passive House certified. So what we're going to do is we're going to use it to demonstrate the monitoring tab, and where we can compare recorded data against predicted data from PHPP. And we're going to look at the summer stress test as well. Go to the so this is our PHPP file. So I'm just going to go straight to the monitoring tab. Monitoring tab is useful, and you do require to have high quality data to input into the sheet. So again, it's same with a lot of other tabs and assessments, that it's effectively is rubbish in, rubbish out. So if you don't have accurate data, it's hard to get accurate results and accurate results for comparison. So this sheet, as you can imagine, is very data driven, even though there are graphical outputs at the end of the file. It's useful. The ventilation section of it is particularly useful for non-domestic buildings, where you can record the occupancy rates of your building that you might have recorded through the first year or 2 years or whatever of occupation, and then we can compare them to the actual occupation levels you give that would have been designed for in PHPP. And what you can then do is you can adjust it for the real world environment to see how your building actually performs. I suppose it's very useful in this to kind of help you fine tune the current building and to give you a chance so you can see opportunities as well then going forward into your next project. So these are just this is data on your averages and your internal temperature and your internal humidity. We record our climate. So in this instance, we were using Netatmo weather stations where we record external temperature and outdoor relative humidity. And what it's doing, it's returning, it's comparing the temperatures and the humidity with the site-specific data or the climate data set that you're using in the project. And you'll see you'll get a number of notes over here on the right-hand side, depending on your result. So it's telling us our temperature deviates by more than 5 Kelvin from a climate data set. And that's in particular because we had in this particular year, we had a very warm summer down in West Cork. It's telling us that our relative humidity differs by 2%, which isn't very much. And it's telling us that our global radiation differs more than 15%. So it can be useful again to, I suppose, to compare, particularly if you're not using site-specific data, to compare against the data you are using, so you can assess how your building's performing. It's graphing our electrical consumption here, and depending how many circuits you might have recorded. It's unfortunate in this project, even though the project is very heavily monitored, using a compact P system, an ELAN compact P system. So the ELAN compact P itself provides ventilation, space heating via the air, and a 2 kilowatt heat pump in the unit, and it also provides our domestic hot water. It's supplemented by not only in backup and electric immersion for the hot water cylinder that's integrated in the unit, supplemented by a geothermal heat pump. And unfortunately, just due to the configuration of the system and the brains inside the unit, we can't tell when each unit was doing either space heating or hot water. So we have a cumulative total, but unfortunately we can't split it out to go into this particular sheet. But if you had a project where you had a straightforward NVHR system and you had a monitor, you can put it into this row here and you'll get a graphic representation versus the predicted PHPP data at the bottom of the page.
Shane, you have 10 minutes. And okay. Richard Kenny asked there whether there'll be a recording available, and there will be. So 10 minutes, and then we'll take more questions.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. So I'll just rattle through the last few bits here, and we've our PV yield monitored here, so it's compared against our predicted yield. So I'm just going to flick down here to the diagrams and give you. So this diagram is still being updated. It got updated. It's being updated, and the formulas are being updated and refined, I suppose. We deal with the Passive House Institute quite a bit, and we tend to interrogate the new software as soon as we get it. So there's been a bit of over and back between ourselves and PHI in the last couple of weeks, as late as today, actually on some of the formats in the sheet and the data sets. But when it's refined and when it's complete, I suppose it is going to be extremely useful. So you can see here how it's set out in that the measured data is in the red crosses and the expected data is in the gray. So you can have, again, if you can break down your heating, it's going to compare your predicted heating versus your actual heating. Same for domestic hot water usage. You'll see that there's a bit of an error here in December. And for some reason, the data set is picking up in the incorrect value because that value doesn't change between November and December. We have electricity here. And we have our electricity monitor. And it's interesting. In fact, we have some secondary unit on site that's being used for some Airbnb. So the electricity usage in the summer is quite a bit higher than predicted. But you'll see in January, February, March, the electricity usage is actually lower than predicted. So it's pretty much on an even keel, except for December again. There's something the December algorithm, I think, in the sheet has an error in it that needs to be adjusted. But interesting, you'll see the PV is pretty much line ball over the course of the year on what is predicted versus what was actually generated. Again, you have your electricity to do with your ventilation system. You have solar thermal. There's no solar thermal in this particular project, or boiler as well. There's quite a bit of data, and depending on what data you have, and depending on what type of project you have, as I say, you can get more or less out of this spreadsheet. Interestingly, it's interesting to do your domestic hot water and compare, I suppose, versus PHPP assumes a default of 3.2 occupants in your building for your domestic hot water usage. And you'll see, in fact, on your overview tab on this project that you've 40% for your household electricity, 30% for hot water generation, and 23% for heating. And in fact, we find in reality that the domestic hot water is almost twice the heating demand. So if this building in actual fact is 4 occupants. So if you change the number of occupants, your hot water generation is much more than your heating. And in fact, if you compare with DEEP, which assumes 6.4 occupants living for this particular project, your domestic water generation is completely double your heating. So it's just an interesting thing to have a look at, I suppose, when you are assessing your usage and your systems. I'm going to just quickly go to your summer stress test on the summer tab, and was a new addition, which is here. And what it does is, it's over here to the right of what we had before. What it does is it stresses the building using particular variables. So the variables being your reduced window ventilation, and if you have a temporary shading and you omit the temporary shading, your increased internal heat gains, and your increased external temperature. And you have then also a combined stress test where it takes all of these individual stresses, combines them, and graphs the results for you. Now, this particular project has used stack ventilation to great effect, and in fact, the hotter it gets outside, the more stack ventilation we get inside, which keeps the building cool during the summer months. Which is why you can see that individually we get no overheating, and even with all the combined overheating, I think we're getting a 1.4% overheating risk with all the combined variables. You also have the option of doing user-defined input here if required, and if there's a particular thing that you're concerned about and you want to test. And all of the results of the overheating assessment can be, I suppose, interrogated when you expand the columns rather up here, and you can see where your temperatures and your losses and your gains are coming from. So the components, I'm just going to run through the last few bits quickly. And the components tab has the ability again to input your heat pump, and again, this makes it easier to copy these from project to project. And there's a number of units already certified. I meant that this will expand over time as time goes on. It's worth noting as well that some tabs are actually hidden by default, and when you open your PHPP, and so by right-clicking on your tab at the bottom, you can unhide. You can see here I've hidden there's a number of sheets here that are hidden that aren't relevant to this project because they're not residential, so they would have been hidden at the start of the job. Some other useful tools that we use depending on the project. Peter Warren provides a number of tools, including a summary results tab it's very useful to bring together all of the data that's in your PHPP and represent it in a graphical way, particularly your envelope losses and your gains and your window balance as well. And it gives you a particular visual assessment of your individual windows in the project as well. They also have a very useful additional shading tab that's useful for calculating, let's say, horizon shading that's not continuous, in particular for trees. That might only be covering your window for a fraction of the day, and I suppose helping you put a numerical value on that. Design PH has seen significant improvement over the last number of years. Version 2.0 is out recently. It's worth noting that it's just at the moment it still can't account for site-specific climate data, and the altitude of the dwelling can't be adjusted in Design PH, so it has to be manually adjusted in the PHP file afterwards. But I understand that it's coming in time. PH Ribbon is a very useful tool. It's worth noting as well. Sorry, before I move on, the Design PH is based on the SketchUp model that you'd make for the project. PH Ribbon is another extremely useful tool to assist with the input of data to PHP. So it's got very useful window plugin, I suppose, to help you input your shading and your shading associated with your D reveal and your O reveals and stuff like that. But particularly, we use it in particular for doing our assessment of our operational carbon and our embodied carbon and our life cycle, and to inform our life cycle analysis. Max Fordham has a very useful peak heating load spreadsheet. It's similar to the graph on your heating demand tab. What his practice have done is they've developed it for the heating load, and what it does is it graphs the more onerous W1 or the W2 weather condition for the project. It's been made for version 9.3, but it can be adjusted with a couple of cells for version 10.4. Max Fordham's practice is long established in the field of building services and environmental engineering, and as I say, it's a very useful tool. So that's all from me, and so we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Shane. Sorry for the rush at the start of this webinar. We were feeling our way through Zoom, having difficulties with videos and everything else. My name is John Morehead. I'm with the PHAI, and it was this morning by Yvonne Coakley, and also arranging this whole CPD series. We've had huge input from Helena McElmail and Caroline Ash-Brady. We have a few questions here. Simon has made some comments here. I think Simon says it's really useful, good to see the variance in use. He wasn't aware of the monitoring element and will be definitely making use of that. And then there's another one. He says, this is Simon Bell, HLM Architects. Not really a PHPP question, but I'd be interested to know how you model trees in Design PH and how you bring that into PHPP as summer/winter values for deciduous trees. Do you use detailed trees, brackets, trunks and leaves, close brackets, or simple trees, lollipops?
Yeah, so there's two ways of tackling it. When we don't use Design PH, we can tackle it with the additional shading tab that Peter Warren's practice have developed, and you can put in different percentages depending on what types of vegetation that you might have. So then that feeds into the calculation, and then that goes in as a reduction factor onto the shading tab that PHPP uses. If you're using Design PH and you're using SketchUp, it takes a literal shading from the actual modeled element. So what they tell you to do is they tell you to select trees from the SketchUp library that are either deciduous or non-deciduous or evergreen, depending on the type of vegetation you have, and then that will feed into the overall calculation. And actually, what you get out of Design PH now is you don't get a series of values. You don't get horizontal shading plus vertical shading plus shading from your reveals. You get one overall reduction factor for each window. So it just feeds into that overall calculation.
Okay. Any more questions? Please put them up on the Q&A form down the bottom central screen. Shane, I've just one comment there. When PHPP 10 came out, we were all a bit taken aback that there was no manual available and that you had to go on like a flipboard page. I gather there might be a change in 10.4 in relation to that.
Yeah, 10.4. Yeah, that was released only last week, I think. Beginning last week, maybe. They have, I think, they realized that there are an awful lot of people out there in practices who wanted a printed copy of the manual, and it's now available with 10.4, as well as the online flipbook.
Okay, we don't appear to have any more questions. As we're saying, we're going to keep a recording of this because I think the variance tab is really very useful. It's very complex. Just Shane going through it there has explained a couple of things to me that I wasn't aware of. And I think it's probably the most useful tool that we have now in PHPP to try to get, basically look at not just the energy efficiency, but also perhaps, Shane, you might tell us whether we could look at the whole carbon side as well with PHRibbon integrated in with that.
Yeah, at the moment, you can rerun your carbon calc for each variant. Now, PHRibbon in itself gives you the option of assessing a few different variants, but I suppose it's useful to be wary that when you input, if you change your variant, and if your variant is changing any envelope areas, that will feed into your carbon calc when you do it. So you can, I suppose, you can do some very complex modeling of your variants and get the carbon results out of all of them. You know?
Okay. The webinars are supported by the RAI and the IEI for CPD points. I think anyone who's looking for CPD points, would they drop us a note? We have a list of who's in attendance today, and we'll follow that up and get them out to you, because I think the CPD cycle is ending in the end of November, I know, for architects anyway. I lost you there. Okay.
Okay.
Have you anything else, Shane, to add?
So there's just one more question I think came in there.
Yeah.
With regards to ventilation, have you results for the whole passive house ventilation? Not quite sure I understand, but from the project I had up on the screen, it's part of the Milan system, so it contributes towards the space heating, which is why we couldn't split it out. But I know that we have projects, and there are other architects out there, passive house designers out there with projects where you can just monitor straightforward, let's call it, heat recovery system, and record the data that's being, or sorry, the energy that it is using, and then that can be input into the monitoring tab, for example, to assess the actual versus predicted.
Yeah. Brendan O'Connor saying yes to CPD points. Okay. So there are no other questions. I think that's a wrap. We very much welcome your feedback. Maybe just drop a mail up onto the PHAI website. We'd love to hear from you. Hopefully the next one will be a little bit more streamlined in our delivery at the start. It's on the 23rd of November at 1 p.m. and it's Anne-Marie Fallon of Archetype, as we introduced earlier. So I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much, Shane. Thanks to everybody for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.